With the launch of Riyadh talks, the United Nations and the United States push for long-term truce in the country. The world isolates Houthi militia over choosing military escalation instead of peace. "100 organizations urge the United Nations Security Council to end the war in Yemen." Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Suwailam. The United Nations and the United States have confirmed that Riyadh consultations and the unilateral truce declaration by the warring parties can lead to a durable and sustainable peace in Yemen. This has been indicated by both the UN and US Special Envoys to Yemen during the opening session of Riyadh peace talks yesterday. The following report has more details.
As part of efforts to end the 7-year-old war that has killed tens of thousands and pushed millions into hunger, the GCC consultations in Riyadh was followed by a UN call for a truce during the holy month of Ramadan, which is taking place this week. The UN Special Envoy to Yemen has facilitated the consultations in Riyadh in a hope of building toward a comprehensive political settlement. The discussions were under the auspices of the GCC, and several Yemeni political parties and civil society members attended. The focus of these discussions was on 6 factors, including the military and security issues and the implementation of a ceasefire for the holy month of Ramadan. UN and US envoys have further welcomed unilateral truce moves by Yemen's warring parties as an encouraging step, while stressing the need for a more comprehensive ceasefire that would help alleviate a humanitarian dire crisis. UN Special Envoy Hans Grundberg and US Special Envoy Tim Linderking were speaking at a gathering of allied Yemeni factions in Riyadh and said the unilateral announcements were a step in the right direction. They have also urged the Houthi militia to put an end for their attacks in Ma'rib, which is known for energy producing. Hans Grundberg stated that Yemen needs a truce in a sense of urgency by the beginning of Ramadan, in which the truce is expected to ease the fuel crisis and facilitate the freedom of movement. Linderking said further, the UN proposal could serve as the first step towards a comprehensive ceasefire and a new, more inclusive political process.
UN envoy met with Prime Minister in Riyadh and further met with the Houthi militia in Muscat. The meetings included the United Nations proposal for a truce during Ramadan and humanitarian measures to ease the freedom of movement of individuals and essential commodities within Yemen. As most Yemeni factions have responded positively to the GCC initiative to hold peace talks in Riyadh, Houthi militia has rejected that call. Such rejection is viewed by many observers as Houthi obstinacy or even political bullying, which clearly reflects one sole fact, which is that the militia can never be of peace. More details are in the following report.
The coalition has backed Yemen's government in its decision to pause military operations in the war-torn country during Ramadan. This move aims to boost the chances of the Gulf Cooperation Council's negotiations to resolve the conflict. The coalition's decision, which went into effect on Wednesday, came after the GCC Secretary-General called for a halt to military operations during intra-Yemeni negotiations in Saudi Arabia. Coalition spokesperson Turki al-Maliki said in a statement that the Joint Forces Command of the coalition announced halt of military operations in Yemen beginning at 6 a.m. Wednesday, March 30th, 2022, in response to the GCC chief's request. He said the initiative aimed to create favorable conditions for the consultations and an encouraging environment for Ramadan. The discussions began on Tuesday, with the US and the UN providing strong support. The Iran-backed Houthi militia, on the other hand, declined to attend, demonstrating its continued rejection of any peace initiatives. The group's rejection will not deter the coalition from continuing its efforts to bring about a political solution to the conflict, which began in 2014 when the Houthis seized the capital Sana'a and large swaths of territory. Iran has made a statement backing the reluctance of the Houthis to join the negotiations. Meanwhile, the militia has detained 3 Yemeni civil rights advocates who were planning to attend the Riyadh talks. Diplomats from the United States, the United Kingdom, and the United Nations are in attendance. This is great news for the Yemeni people, as the world will bear witness to how the Iran-backed militia is doing everything it can to prolong the conflict, sabotage all peace attempts, terrorize the Yemeni people and deny them the right to live in peace and dignity. The United States and others who have been hesitant to label the Houthi group as a terrorist organization and put pressure on its sponsor, Iran, may have needed this wake-up call to begin supporting the coalition's efforts to restore Yemen's stability and territorial unity.
The Russian Federation has renewed its support for a comprehensive dialogue between all political parties in Yemen. The Russian embassy indicated the importance of the Yemeni consultations under the auspices of the GCC. Russian Federation confirmed further the condemning of Houthi attack on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. As the war enters its 8th year, more than 100 organizations have written an open letter to the head of the International Security Council, urging him to act to end the war in Yemen. This comes when civilian casualties have increased dramatically. More details on this are within this report.
The Yemen conflict heralds its 8th year tomorrow, and civilians continue to pay the toll of the battle. The war is destroying lives and livelihoods, causing massive displacement, and laying waste to public infrastructure and the economy, resulting in one of the world's biggest humanitarian crises. In light of these facts, 100 organizations working in and out of Yemen have pleaded for immediate action in an open letter to the United Nations Security Council. In the letter, the organizations have urged UNSC members to engage directly with all parties to the conflict and urged them to abide by international humanitarian law and ensure immediate and unhindered access for agencies to deliver life-saving services to millions of people in need. Civilian fatalities and illegal assaults on civilian infrastructure have nearly doubled since the United Nations Human Rights Council voted in September to disband the group of eminent experts, the only international independent accountability mechanism operating in Yemen. With nearly one citizen killed or injured every hour, January witnessed the greatest civilian casualties since the records began in 2018. There is no motivation for warring parties to follow the conduct of war, much less broker peace, in the absence of a strong international independent accountability structure. The lethal legacy of unexploded ordnances and landmines not only raises the everyday risks of people being killed or injured, but it also jeopardizes Yemen's stabilizing and long-term rehabilitation efforts. In the letter, the organizations called for the protection of civilians to be prioritized within the escalating hostilities, and appealed to all states to immediately halt arms transfers and military support to all parties of the conflict. In addition, they advocated for more financial assistance for the response's most underfunded components, including education and protection, in order to continue providing life-saving services. Finally, they encouraged the UNSC to do all in its ability to safeguard humanitarian workers and local organizations. Kidnappings, car hijackings, and attacks on humanitarian installations persist, and local civil society organizations are especially exposed to detention and coercive threats. The letter concluded by saying that although the Yemeni crisis may not be making headlines, people must not forget about Yemen's people. The international community cannot continue to look on shamelessly while millions of civilians in Yemen suffer on a daily basis.
Yemenis have met face-to-face to negotiate a political solution since last peace consultations in Kuwait in 2016. The current Riyadh talks are the largest gathering for Yemeni political factions in recent time. Many observers say it can make advances in terms of debating practical solutions to the 7-year war. The following report has more details.
The peace process in Yemen has been stalled for too long. The top UN envoy for the country told a summit meeting on Wednesday in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, aiming to build on the Saudi-led coalition's unilateral declaration of a ceasefire ahead of the holy month of Ramadan. According to news reports, Houthi rebels who have been battling the coalition in support of the internationally recognized government since 2015 refused to take part in the talks given the summit venue. In addition to calling for the talks to be held in a neutral country, the Houthis wanted the coalition to allow the reopening of Sanaa's airport and lift restrictions on the country's ports. Special Envoy Hans Grunberg told the Gulf Cooperation Council, "I am a firm believer in strengthening the United Nations cooperation with regional organizations to advance peace and security." He welcomed all diplomatic initiatives supporting the UN's efforts to resume an intra-Yemeni political process and bring an end to the suffering caused by the conflict. Yemenis from different sides of the conflict have not engaged in face-to-face discussions for a comprehensive political solution since 2016 in Kuwait. And over the years, the harm caused by the war has continued to accumulate. Mr. Grunberg painted a picture of state institutions eroding, citizens living without basic services, and Yemenis suffering from severe restrictions on their movements. Yemen needs a truce, he asserted, informing the participants that for over 2 months he has been engaging the parties with a sense of urgency to reach an agreement ahead of Ramadan. The peace proposal includes easing the fuel crisis and facilitating freedom of movement, bringing some immediate relief to Yemenis, especially during the holy month of fasting. The war has killed, injured, and displaced civilians and decimated the national economy. The younger generation is being deprived of their future. The worsening economic and humanitarian conditions have a significant impact on women, children, and marginalized groups. The longer the conflict goes on, the more severe the impact, and the more difficult it will be to reverse the damage.
An international report reveals smuggling networks which transport weapons from Iran to the Houthi militia. More than 1,000 weapons were confiscated, which reveals the presence of sophisticated cross-border smuggling networks. The U.S. Navy has reported that this sea route has historically been used to smuggle weapons to Houthi rebels in Yemen. Republican Senator Ted Cruz stressed the Houthis have long participated in brutal terrorist acts. He added that U.S. administration should designate the Houthi militia in terrorist list again. He warned of the Iranian nuclear agreement, which is expected to be signed with President Biden, that might threaten Yemen's security. Clashes erupted between Houthi militia and civilians in Ib Governorate. Local sources said that a Houthi member was killed and 2 citizens were injured following the arrival of an armed Houthi campaign to the area. The sources pointed out that the militia pushed an armed campaign against the civilians. A child was killed and another injured in a Houthi landmine explosion in Al-Bayda Governorate. According to local sources, a landmine left by the Houthi militia exploded in 2 children in Al-Humayqan area at Al-Zahir district. Coming next. Displaced people's suffering continues and fires demolished tent of displaced family in Hudaydah.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم بعلي بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما خرج لما ندفنا شقيرة ما نقدرش ناكل داخل ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. As the war in Ukraine escalates, the United Nations has warned that food security in Yemen, Egypt, and Lebanon is fragile. Such a warning makes the threat of famine a definite reality. The following report has more details.
The start of Ramadan is an inconvenient time for food prices across most of the Middle East to be surging. But this was the case last year, compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's happening again this Ramadan to an even greater degree, in no small part due to the Ukraine conflict. On top of that, longer-term economic crises have not gone away, particularly in global supply chains. The past week has seen a number of stories that highlight the complexity and scale of the problem. Prices are rising globally, including rich countries, but in the Middle East, where many were already struggling, they are being felt acutely. This Ramadan, no one's thinking about COVID-19. What's on everyone's minds are the rising prices nationwide. Even bread is expensive now and many people are really struggling. It is not just food prices putting a strain on families preparing for celebrations, but energy as well. Families are stocking up increasingly expensive gas cylinders for cooking. For the least fortunate, the issue is reaching crisis levels. David Beasley, executive director of the UN's World Food Programme, recently told the UN Security Council that Yemen, Egypt, and Lebanon are facing a food catastrophe as a result of the Ukraine conflict. This is despite 2 million Yemeni children already being acutely malnourished. In an unfortunate twist of fate, as fears over COVID-19 have diminished, fears over food prices have become more acute in a number of Muslim-majority countries, making this month's festive season once again a difficult one for many. Conflict and poor macroeconomic conditions are expected to continue to drive significantly below average access to typical sources of food and income throughout the projection period. Crisis outcomes are expected to persist at the area level, even in the presence of large-scale humanitarian assistance, with worst-affected households expected to face emergency or catastrophe outcomes. Famine would be possible if there is a significant shock to commercial food import levels, or if food supply is otherwise cut off from particular areas for a prolonged period.
The Relief Subcommittee in El Jauf Governorate held a closing ceremony for displaced children. The ceremony was held for children outside the framework of education, and numbers of enrolled children reached 380, while the number is still expanding amid the establishment of new kindergartens.
Today, we're conducting the concluding ceremony for kindergarten students. Those students are displaced or marginalized in El Jauf Governorate. This event was organized by the Supreme Aid Agency in the Governorate. The aim of this event is to turn the curse of displacement into noble educational ethics in which we plant in our kids. We started this project for displaced and marginalized students. More than 400 kids were enrolled, both boys and girls. Enrolling is open for displaced students from all governorates. This is really a great project. We intend to target more children in other displaced camps.
Suffering of displaced people continues as the conflict extends. In Al Khoucha district, a fire demolished the tent of Ahmed Misawa's family. Everything in that tent was totally burnt. Now, this displaced family is homeless. The following report has more details.
Fires outbreak the camps of the displaced in Al Khoucha district, the last of which was the eruption of a fire at Ahmed Musawa's house, where the cause of which is still uncertain. But what was certain about it is that this fire has led to a complete burning of his house and the destruction of his furniture, foodstuffs, and documents. But thankfully, it didn't result in any human damage. Musawa can be found now searching for any clothes remaining among his house rooms or any blanket that could warm his 5 children. Musawa was forced to build this house of straw to shelter him and his family from the brutality of displacement.
My house was completely burnt and I have nothing now. Neither me nor my wife. We only have some clothes which my wife managed to sew after the disaster.
Musawa was displaced from Hais to Khoucha district due to the ongoing war, and the fire of his new house has worsened the situation, although some of the families tried to suppress the fire.
Only God knows what we are going through. We have run out of everything and we have nothing left to do.
Camps in Al Khoucha are witnessing continuous fires due to lack of security and safety and the existence of traditional kitchens among the tents, especially since most of the tools in the camp are flammable.
The last period has witnessed many fires, and approximately the year 2020 included 32 combustion and 18 ones in year 2021.
Thousands of displaced are living at Khawkha camps, and they have little to basic living essences, amid hard circumstances and absence of organization's role.
Makha Union won over Al Qadisiyah team on penalties in the final of Al Nahda 2 Cup. The final match of football competitions for this tournament was organized by the Youth Department of the Political Bureau in cooperation with the Youth and Sports Offices in the districts of Hais, Al Khoucha and Makha. Here's a reminder of the mini headlines. With the launch of Riyadh talks, the United Nations and the United States push for long-term truce in the country. The world isolates Houthi militia over choosing military escalation instead of peace. "100 organizations urge the United Nations Security Council to end the war in Yemen. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.